If you've listened to All In for a while, you've probably noticed by now that this podcast tends to be a representation of both what I see people around me experiencing, but also what I myself am going through. I love to share thoughts that help me in hopes that if it helped me, it might help someone else. So recently, when I listened to a podcast about motherhood that shifted my paradigm completely, I had to find a way to share. On her podcast, Down the Well, Elle Rowley interviewed a woman named Dr. Lisa Marciano, and Dr. Marciano said this: if we're lucky, life is going to use us up. That's kind of the point, that we should spend ourselves on something larger than self. Motherhood is not the only thing that you could spend yourself on, but it's a pretty good thing to spend yourself on, end quote. The quote stopped me in my tracks. And so on today's episode, I talk with Elle Rowley about why Dr. Marciano's message resonated so deeply with her and why she is now on a mission to reclaim motherhood as a powerful, life-giving force, not only to the children we bear, but to the women we become in the process. Elle Rowley is a writer and founder of the award-winning baby carrier company Solly Baby, a multi-million-dollar company that she and her husband recently sold their majority stake in. The couple now invest in family-owned businesses like the one they started. She is the mother of 4 children ranging in ages from 8 to 16, and most recently, she hosts a podcast called Down the Well. This is All In, an LDS Living podcast where we ask the question, what does it really mean to be all in the gospel of Jesus Christ? I'm Morgan Pearson, and I am so honored to have Elle Rowley. Do you say it Rowley, Elle?
Yep, like roly-poly, yep.
Perfect. Okay, I wanted to make sure I got that right. So grateful to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm a big fan of the podcast and you, and just happy to be here.
Well, you are so sweet. I am a big fan of your work. And I have to tell you, those Solly Baby pajamas, I know that you're known for the wrap. The pajamas are they are what dreams are made of. My girls, if I had $1 for every time they've worn those pajamas, and Emma wore them, I kid you not, from 5 months until 2 weeks ago, and she's almost 2 years old.
She must have stayed pretty small. Or
she is. She's pretty petite, but they do stretch well. And now, as soon as I could put Jane in them, she's wearing them. So just know we're living in your pajamas.
That makes me so happy. They are buttery soft, as we like to say.
They're so great. Okay, so I am so excited because I have been binging your podcast and I have learned so much. And I think it's particularly interesting to me as a new mom that's trying to find my way in the momming world. But I wanted to start by asking you, I feel like on the surface, you seem to be a little bit of an unlikely candidate to host a podcast that is seeking to reclaim and recast motherhood in a positive light. But you read a book, from what I understand, that was transformative for you in the way that you view motherhood. And that was kind of the motivation for starting this podcast. So I wondered, could you tell me a little bit about where you were in life when you read this book and why it made such an impact on you?
Yeah, I would say that Lisa Marciano's book that you're talking about is called Motherhood, Finding and Facing Yourself. And she's a Jungian analyst that I love all of her work. But this book in particular, it just gave words to something that I had already felt for a very long time. I mean, really since becoming a mother. Motherhood for me unlocked a lot of creative potential and confidence. I mean, through hard, pain and discomfort that I didn't have before becoming a mom. And it was easy to feel, I guess, misunderstood by people who saw the professional success I was having as the real treasure, and motherhood kind of as the accessory to the professional success in Solly Baby, when really the reverse was true. I never would have started Solly Baby had I not become a mom first, and not not because Solly Baby's about motherhood, but again, because of that creative potential and confidence that it unlocked. And Lisa's book really gave the language to describe what was happening through motherhood, the transformation that had taken place. And so Solly Baby was a part of this mother's hero's journey that I was on. And I think it always kind of bothered me that people saw Solly Baby as the treasure rather than motherhood, and Solly Baby supporting that. I mean, it also, supported my personal development. Motherhood is a part of that personal development. So I don't know. I think that her book, again, it just gave the language to what I was experiencing, which is motherhood helps you to face and find yourself if you approach it in a way that really can unlock those things. And I just feel so deeply as I see so many women turn and men turn away from parenting, from mothering and fathering, that in that we're losing, outside of our, like the theological, spiritual implications of that, we're losing so much potential for personal growth and becoming kind of, unlocking all of this hidden potential.
Well, I love what you said about it bothered you that people were viewing Solly Baby as the treasure. I think that sometimes it's so easy when people are applauding you for a particular thing to be like, oh, well, that's where my value lies. And I think for me, my experience has been a little bit the reverse, because I was working before I had kids. And so I think people knew how badly I wanted to be a mom, but for me, it's been like making sure that now that I'm having the opportunity to be a mom, that I'm appreciating it rather than looking back and thinking, oh, well, when I was doing this, everybody was cheering me on. And now I sit in an apartment being like bossed around by a 2-year-old, who's very cute. She is a very, very adorable dictator, but she tells me what to do all the time. And so I wanted to dig into this a little bit more. And you actually called your podcast Down the Well because of this idea that's expressed in Dr. Marciano's book. And you summed up the ideas and the inspiration for this name in a recent Deseret News article. You said, you get sent down the well over and over, and then it's dark and you're in an unknown land and you have to find your way. And it's all about the approach, using humility and open-heartedness and kindness and curiosity. So I wondered, Elle, what do you think has helped you approach this hero's journey with humility and open-heartedness and kindness and curiosity instead of some of the alternative ways that we could approach a hero's journey that looks a little bit different than maybe what we were anticipating?
Well, I mean, I think that often the most poignant life lessons come from doing it wrong. And I definitely have learned a lot by doing the opposite of approaching those down the well moments of when life really, really throws you down one, which motherhood does, like you said, all the time. And by approaching it at times with, entitlement or being prideful or thinking it shouldn't be so hard and feeling like kind of victimizing myself, I have seen the fruits of that approach. And it is, I don't think it's an overstatement to say those are curses of resentment and bitterness and, anxiety and sadness and so many things, so many bad fruits, I guess you could say. And then the alternative is what those qualities that you just talked about: humility, open-heartedness, kindness, curiosity. And I've also felt the transformation, especially in those younger years because of motherhood, where you are right now, because it's just so overwhelming for most of us, like physically and in every way. And it requires so much humility that I think it does naturally breed more curiosity and our babies just open our hearts up. And I think that that's a really amazing combination to make us more teachable. But it's easy as motherhood goes along to lose to lose those qualities. And now we're in the endurance game of motherhood as you go along, and
the marathon.
Yes, marathon. And it is so much easier to lose those qualities. And then in that, we lose this potential for continual transformation. And so it starts to feel like a lot of stagnation. And then we go back to those other qualities. So I'm hoping through my message that it helps mothers at every phase, but especially in that phase where you're like, man, I mean, those early years of, this is just so hard and then the later ones of this can feel so boring. This can feel like I'm not growing still. But I think that when we put those qualities at the forefront in our approach, it just changes everything and opens up so much more potential for transformation, even when we don't see it. My mom is such a good example of this. She was a single mother to 7 kids. I'm the youngest and has had some really difficult trials over the years. But I would say that one of her crowning qualities is just her humility and open-heartedness. And so she never has let those experiences harden her. And she stayed soft in a way that is easy to look at as like, when you hear the word soft, to think of that as
like a negative.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's just the most beautiful thing. It's not a weakness. It takes so much strength to stay vulnerable and to stay open. And I just have been so grateful to see that in her example over the years of staying humble, staying open, and to see how that's helped her to continue to grow as a person.
I love that you said that. I actually had a really unique experience on my mission. I have always, my mom is a person that always has had that, what you said, softness. She's very tender. And on my mission, I started to read talks about meekness. And I realized that what I had always viewed as softness, I think, was actually meekness in my mom. And that she was such an example of that Christ-like quality. And I wanted to have that softness, And I got home from my mission and I was crying all the time. And I think, obviously, like you get home from a mission and there's a lot of emotions and you don't really know what to do with yourself. But I one day was praying and I said, Heavenly Father, like I keep crying and that's not me. Like, I don't know what's going on. And I had this very distinct thought. You prayed throughout your mission to be more like your mom. And I'm giving you that now. And I think that there is, not that my mom like cries all the time, let me be clear about that, but I think that she has always had this softness. And I love that you highlighted that quality in your mom. I have a question for you, a follow-up. As a young mom, you mentioned like feeling victimized. And I don't feel like I feel that, because I think I do recognize, like, I prayed for the opportunity to be a mom for so long, and it took a long time for that to happen for me. But the thing that I feel like I battle the most is guilt of not being better at it. So instead of like this shouldn't be so hard, my thought is, I'm terrible at this. I'm curious how you feel like you've combated feelings of like inadequacy as a mom, as somebody that's like a step ahead of me.
Oh man. I mean, I think that's it. I think it still is humility. We have to be willing to be bad at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We're the humility to say, I'm not, I'm not the mom that I dreamt of. And I will reach out for help. I'm going to stay open-hearted. I'm going to stay curious. And that's going to help me to find, new resources and new ideas. Like, the humility to be bad at something is is not something that we always associate with humility, but I think it's one of its best applications is to say, I'm willing to just stay bad at this as long as I need to. And of course you're not. That's the reality of it. And I think that then, that it takes seeing things in the bigger picture of just knowing that it's a long hero's journey. And that's not the purpose, is not to nail. I love that Lisa Marchiano talks so much about how it really one of the biggest treasures that comes from falling down the well and emerging again, that death and rebirth over and over, is to know ourselves better. It's not perfection. It's just not. I think that as we continue on that, we're going to find more wholeness, but not perfection. And I think it's just, the adversary works so hard to discourage us and to make us think that we're doing not a good job. And I think good friends really come in handy there too, just to know you're all down the well together at different times. It's just so normal. I don't know if that's comforting at all, but
no, it is. It is. And I think you're right that I think I've always struggled doing things that I feel like I'm not good at. And you're right about the adversary. My husband's always like, and where did that thought come from? Who wants you to feel that way? So also, I think having a husband who can call it out is also.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder, Elle, how have you seen women, even within the church, as we're talking about kind of trying to reclaim this idea of motherhood as a hero's journey versus something that is crushing women or something to be survived? How have you seen women, even within the church, detract from or seek to diminish the role of a mother?
I don't think that most women seek to diminish it, but I think in an effort to justify our choices, just as human nature, we can unintentionally diminish the choices of others while we're trying to justify our own. And the reverse can definitely be true as well, right? And I always want to be mindful of that. But I'm obsessed with this triple goddess archetype of the Maiden, Mother, and Matriarch or crone. And you can find that in just about every tradition, including ours, but it can shed some light maybe on what's happened to this role of motherhood from my perspective. I think that we've become obsessed as a society with the maiden, this archetype of the single, beautiful young woman full of potential, unlimited possibilities and adventure. And this phase of the maiden was a very short-lived phase for much of history. And part of this is just due to shorter lifespans. And now we have longer lifespans, but women were pressured to enter, this mother archetype or phase often before they were ready. And I think that maybe led to a bigger pendulum swing than has been helpful. And now we idolize the maiden. Just culturally, it's just everywhere. It's the highest ideal that represents female empowerment and choice and freedom. And we can reject the mother in that as a threat to the maiden, like taking our freedom and our empowerment. But the maiden is just the first part of that path. And it very naturally leads down to the path of the mother. Eventually, we need to make choices. We need to commit to something. We need to make sacrifices. And the mother is really this archetype of nurturing creation. And that can look a lot of different ways, but we know that having children, in our theology, that having children is a very natural and powerful embodiment of this, of nurturing creation and multiplying and replenishing the earth. And I believe that this is as much for our own development as it is for God or mankind. But what's difficult about ideals is that, like, my husband uses this analogy that, like, the North Star is a guide, but we're never going to reach the North Star, right? Like, sailors, you may use that, but they're not they're not going to get to the North Star. They're just using it to help them get where they need to go. And it's meant to be a guide and not a judge. And many women will not marry or have children for many different reasons. And none of us will ever fully be the mothers that we desire to be. That's just the reality of it. But because of the pain that can come with that realization, I think it's really easy to get rid of the ideal altogether. And I think that we have unintentionally, and some people maybe intentionally, done that rather than just accepting our realities with humility and faith, that we may not live out this archetype exactly how we imagined that to be, this mother archetype, but it's still an ideal worth keeping. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. I think that it's hard because I always say that the hardest things in life are the things that you don't expect. And I think that's why letting go of an idealized expectation is hard, because we all have this thing that we've expected, the way that we expected we would be. And then there's adjusting to that reality of, oh, well, maybe I won't be that. But I always say, like, those are the things that help us become the most. So if you didn't, for me, it was always like, I didn't expect to be single into my early 30s. And that's the thing that was the hardest, but it's also the thing that I wouldn't trade because it helped me become. And so likewise, I think if you are not living up to your expectation of how you would be in that role as a mother, that doesn't mean that you're failing. It just means that it's helping you become what you're meant to become.
Oh, you're right. It's the hardest thing to keep faith in, but it is the only way to live. I mean, otherwise you're just arguing with reality all the time, right, and always losing.
Right. Well, I love how you highlight that idea of the matriarch as well. And we'll get to that because you've dug into that a little bit on your podcast. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you have had seemingly both. Most people don't get the opportunity to excel in the business world and also be a mom. And you've done both. And so I wondered, how would you compare the two, the role of a mother and the role of a successful entrepreneur?
It's so funny. I mean, that's a really kind framing of it. But I mean, this is just my path. This is just life. Like, I am a mother. I have been able to do, some really amazing opportunities as an entrepreneur that I'm super grateful for. But it doesn't feel like how you just described it. What I feel proud of is that I have done my very, very best to stay aligned with my values and principles in my relationship with God. And that's the part that I'm like, yeah, I've not done that perfectly, but I have really tried to along the way. And it's been amazing to see what's unfolded because of that. And so I hope that, women who look at my example or my life, that what they would take away from it is not like, I mean, maybe if it is their path that they become, it's the reality for many, many women that we're going to work. It was the reality for my mom as a single mom, and it is the reality for many women. And I'm not a single mom, and that was my path. That has been my path. And I am so grateful for those opportunities. But I think that it's not like I was able to check these boxes. It's that I was able to follow the inspiration where it led. And that has been the greatest adventure. That has been my hero's journey. And I'm still on it. Right. But I don't know if that even answered your question, but.
Well, no, I love what you said about the thing that you're proud of is that you kept God in your journey. And I think that that's the important thing. I think sometimes we look at each other and it's like, oh, well, she's doing this and I'm doing this. And, whether it's she's better or I'm better, who knows? Mm-hmm. But I think the key is letting go of that judgment of ourselves and of one another and just trying to figure out, do we have God in it? And is he the one directing our path? And if so, then every path is going to look different anyway. And letting ourselves and others around us have our unique hero's journey as mothers, I think is important. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how Solly Baby came to be, and ultimately you and your husband sold the company. What led to you taking kind of a step back there?
So I started Solly Baby in 2011 when I was pregnant with my second baby, Solly, and made the first wrap for him and fell in love with this baby wearing experience. My husband was still in school and I've been looking for a side hustle for a while. I knew that, the internet's just an amazing thing where you can help to provide for the family and be at home, and brings its own challenges. But I was so grateful that I'm still able to do that. But I could just see the potential for these wraps, and started an Etsy shop. And then, it's like so hard to sum up that decade of my life of growing the company and working with my husband and an amazing team. It was just like step by step and lots of faith and blessings along the way. But in 2021, we were approached by buyers, and it had I knew a few years leading up to that we were getting to a point of growth in the company that I was just to say not interested in sounds like, so I don't know, privileged or something, but I was just, I knew that my time there was coming to an end, that I'd offered what I needed to offer to Solly Baby, and that it was time to creatively, and for the next phase of growth for the company, for my kids, just the phase of my life that I was coming into. I just knew it was the right time to hand the reins over. And so it just the timing was right. And I'm still involved with the company. I'm still on the board. I still own, Jared and I still own part of the company. And I absolutely just love, and I'm so proud of Solly Baby and how it's grown and the direction it continues to go in. But yeah, it was just that okay, time for another kind of death and rebirth, and you got to let this part go. And it's easy to overly identify with different roles or phases in our lives. And I think it's such a healthy exercise to just say, okay, and now we're going to let that identity shed that was never my identity in the first place. But yeah, and make room for this next phase. And that's where I am now.
When you were just saying that, it reminded me of a quote that I love or a story, I guess, by President Eyring, where he talked about when he and his wife were sealed, that they were told, Hal and Kathy, live so that when the call comes, you can walk away easily. And I think that idea of being able to walk away from something, not loving anything too much that you can't walk away from it, is so important. And being able to follow the Lord such that nothing is out of reach when he asks us to do something or to go in a different direction. And so I admire you for recognizing that your time with that was needed to shift and being able to do that. I loved in your interview with Dr. Lisa Marciano, the discussion about losing your life, which reminded me of the scripture, whosoever shall lose his life for my sake shall find it. How would you say that has been true in your life? And what have you discovered about yourself through motherhood? You mentioned that Solly Baby never would have happened if you hadn't gained confidence from motherhood. But what would you say you've discovered about yourself through motherhood that you might not have discovered otherwise?
I think we live in a time where we are obsessed with self-care. We glorify self-care and focus on self in a way that, it's like a truth that then gets distorted in a way, and it can really make us miserable. I think it's Jordan Peterson who says something like, there's very little difference in focusing on yourself and suffering. Like, when we focus too much on ourselves, we can drive ourselves nuts. It's just not a happy way to live. And yet, like, the major mantra of our times is to do just that. And it's all self-love and obsess over your every need. And I'm all about self-care. Just got an amazing facial yesterday. I go on walks with my husband every morning. Like, I am all in on taking care of ourselves. But the overemphasis on that can definitely make us miserable. And I think that we're seeing that generally in our culture with this, heightened awareness and focus on self-care, and also like skyrocketing mental health crises. Like, just everything around mental health is so poor right now in our culture. And I can't help but make that connection to this fear of sacrificing, this fear of having children, the fear of being of giving too much of ourselves, of losing our lives so that we can find them. And I think it's such a lie that we are protecting. We end up protecting our sacrifices so much that then we have lives that are much less meaningful and connections that are much weaker than they could be. And then it's no wonder that, fertility rates are so low and so many young people are choosing just not to have kids, with that narrative so strong. But I think that we're not making the connection enough of how unhappy we are, because of that, really the fruits of that. And motherhood for me, through all of those sacrifices that are so hard, like, you can't underscore it enough. It tests every part of you. But on the other side of that is transformation. It is finding yourself. It is knowing yourself. And that's, motherhood, like that archetype it's a Christ archetype. Like, it is service. It is losing yourself and finding it, not in our kids. It is in losing ourselves for his sake. It's what God has asked us to do. And that's how we're going to find that meaning and really find true purpose and our, the people that God wants us to be. So, I have discovered everything about myself through motherhood.
I think that absolutely you answered that question. And I love what you said about motherhood being a kind of a type of Christ. I think, who has given me the best example of Christ-like character in my life, it would be my mom. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And I recognize there are some people that don't and haven't had that experience. But I think in its purest form, motherhood gives us such a taste of what Christ-like love feels like. I want to applaud something that was said about you, Elle, in this article in Deseret News, because I think that this is such a credit to you. Someone that knows you was quoted as saying she's never embraced this boss babe culture of entrepreneurship, but she's still been very successful. In the chase to have it all, millennial women are exhausted. We feel like our worth depends on being successful in and outside the home, but we don't have anybody to tell us what that looks like except for men. I think the fact that you have achieved the things that you've achieved without taking on that boss babe persona is so impressive and speaks kind of to that softness that you mentioned seeing in your mom. I think being able to do both, to be successful, but not to try to be just like a man, I think is a beautiful thing. So I wondered, what does success as a woman look like for you? And how do you feel like you've avoided that mentality of being a boss babe, as this woman put it?
I've told this story before, but I'll never forget going into this meeting with a manufacturer in Los Angeles years ago. And I debated back and forth, like, should I bring the baby? Should I not bring the baby? She's still nursing. And I really want to bring the baby, but will that be distracting? And I was meeting someone else there who had a very different kind of approach to it. It was definitely more of like this masculine energy, which some of that is just personality too. And I'm not, there's no judgment of that, but that's not me. And it felt like one of those defining moments of like, okay, I need to like go in there and like hardball and like negotiate and do all these things to like not bring the baby. And like, well, do I want to be that person? Nothing is wrong with that person, except that person is not me. and so I remember wrapping the baby on my chest and going in and accomplishing everything that I needed to accomplish in that meeting while being totally aligned with myself and who the person that I want to be, and with my insecurities and everything, but really just bringing my whole self. And I think it's easy to think that we need to bring on more of this masculine energy and sometimes, sometimes that might, serve us well. I'm not saying to be afraid of it, but for me, success as a woman looks like being my whole self and bringing my whole self. And I think that we're all seeking wholeness, which of course only comes through Jesus Christ. So anytime we're tying our worth to something else other than that, then we're in trouble, right? And so whether it's boss babe or it's like this perfectionist, like ideal of motherhood, like that's not it either. And I think it's just so important to stay really connected and tied to where our worth comes from. And again, just receiving that personal revelation, having that guide us. And I think that it doesn't matter what area of the world you're trying, you're working in, or there's going to be some temptation to take on a persona that is not true, not totally authentic to that being a daughter of God.
I love the story about taking your baby to the meeting. I recently had a little bit of a similar experience. I was asked to go on the Follow Him podcast with John Bytheway and Hank Smith. And I had tried they ask you to block out a certain amount of time. And I had already said, I am breastfeeding. Like I would need to break that amount of time up into 2 parts. But then there were some technical difficulties getting started and we got started late. And I was like, my baby is going to get hungry, and my husband was texting me and he's like, she's starting to get really fussy. What do you want me to do? And I was like, you know what? Just bring her up here to me. And so they video in addition to talking. So I like positioned myself. Well, actually, I think I fed her before we came back on the video, but then I just like held her. And she was like cooing and making noises. And I kept thinking like, people are going to think this is so distracting. And then when the video came out, I just will read you a couple of the comments, but there were so many that were like this. The first comment says, so real to see Morgan with her youngest modeling the mother who is exercising her talents, both of nurturing her family and her fellow saints. It's a big deal. I hope this becomes normative, not exceptional when we see young mothers in this space. And then another said, thank you for your example and caring for the needs of your baby daughter, even when you have an important podcast to contribute to. And I just thought it was so cool that people were like applauding that when I thought it was going to be like, oh, that was distracting. Like, please don't bring your baby into this space. Like I can't learn about the scriptures when you're holding your baby. And instead it was the opposite. And I think sometimes we shy away from those types of opportunities for motherhood to even be recognized because we're scared of it.
So validating. And I have found that over and over where people have said, and in so many interviews, people have said, how has being a woman held you back in business or a mother? And I'm like, I mean, it hasn't. I've actually found it really disarming and really helpful in many situations, like having an adorable baby with me. Not that it's always appropriate to have a baby with me in terms of like, if it's just distracting for me or whatever, it doesn't mean you have to, but I think that we underestimate how much we can do as mothers, how many skills we're actually getting through these long, hard days of motherhood, and it can just look so many different ways. And I hope that feels exciting to moms to, I don't know, to continually give each other permission.
Test the water.
Yeah. Like just bring the baby,
Bring the baby and see how people react.
Yeah.
I think it definitely helps that your company is all about baby carrying. That's definitely a nice thing. But I do think we don't even give people a shot to be supportive of motherhood.
Yes.
Okay, you mentioned this archetype earlier of matriarch, and I want to make sure that we talk about this before we finish. You have a series on your podcast where you highlight matriarchs, which I love because I think somehow honoring our elders has become a little bit lost on our generation. I do appreciate from time to time when you see like TikToks or reels of like people acknowledging how great older people are. But I think that respect sometimes, or the willingness to learn from people that are older than us and have been there, it sometimes just is non-existent. And so why do you think that is so important?
Well, I think that you highlighted some of the biggest reasons, but coming back to this maiden mother matriarch kind of the woman's, path here, it's no wonder that we have lost the matriarch because one, fewer people are becoming mothers, but also because we love the maiden. And so we don't like things that remind us of aging or death. And especially as so much of our society has lost faith in an afterlife, I think there's more fear around it. And so we don't look to our elders. We worship technology in so many ways. And so we don't rely on kind of the wisdom of our elders and wisdom traditions. And I think that hurts us in so many ways. I mean, I think if you ask just about anybody, what's something you learned from your grandparents, it's like, I mean, they're treasures, and so often it's perspective that would really help us help all of our anxiety that we're all experiencing, or so many of us are, but yeah, I think that to cut off from that part of ourselves and that part of our culture is really damaging. And I think it helps us not look, it stops us from looking to the future, and it pulls us back into this maiden phase that is not, there are qualities that we want to bring from that maiden archetype of adventure and potential and trying new things, but we don't want to go back to that. Your grandma Moses, who was my last portrait that I did of a matriarch, this folk painter, she says she never felt older than when she was 16. And I often remind my 16-year-old that. I'm like, when things are hard for her, I'm like, I just want you to know, like Grandma Moses lived till she was like 101, 102. And she said she never felt older than when she was 16. It's a hard time. And so we don't need to be so afraid of getting older, but we need more examples that we're looking to of how to do that gracefully. And I'm so grateful for, we actually live in a culture in the church where we do recognize that way more than outside of it, at least here in the US.
Right. I totally agree with what you said. I think that as you were talking, I was thinking, I think years ago, people lived in closer proximity to their elders. And so I think that sometimes that physical distance also creates like an emotional distance. I just talked to my grandma on Mother's Day, and I normally talk to her way more often, but with two little girls, more time had passed than I am proud to admit. And just talking to her, like, it made my day. And so I think that it's so important to make sure that in losing that physical distance, we don't lose touch with the people that can have influence on us. You mentioned this woman, Grandma Moses, and I believe a friend was the one that introduced you to her work. And I wondered if you could just tell listeners about this woman and why her story has been so inspirational and comforting to you.
Yeah, so she was a primitive, as in like untrained folk painter in the early 1900s. And she was a farm wife and mother, and she didn't actually become famous until she picked up painting in her 70s and really didn't become a household name until her 80s. And she was on greeting cards. Her art was, and selling paintings, now for millions of dollars. And she's met presidents and painted for them. It's just this amazing story. And yet when you read about her life and the things that mattered to her, it was, she was so funny. She's so funny. But it was just one phase in her journey. And I love it because one, it represents this continued kind of enduring to the end in this really cool way of being open to continual transformation, of death and rebirth, and of like letting go of, the last phase and embracing the next phase and seeing where your intuition, the spirit guides you. And she just really, really embodied that idea so well. I loved just her getting famous at that age and just how little she cared about the fame at all. And she would say things like, I could have just raised chickens. I was thinking, my knuckles were hurting, my hands were hurting from arthritis because she had done a lot of worsted art, like embroidery kind of paintings, things with yarn but then she had arthritis. So she's like, oh, I guess I'll just pick up painting. And she said, but I could have just raised a bunch more chickens and that would have been just as good. And really, that's how it should be, right? Of like, yeah, well, this is where God led me and this was the next thing. And so whether it's being famous and hanging out with the president or raising chickens, it's all the same when you're aligned with your values and your principles. And she really lived that way. And I just, I could glean lessons from her autobiography and the other biographies I've read, and just looking at her art and these beautiful, beautiful folk scenes that are so simply painted, and they're just of the most mundane daily parts of life that you just feel the light and the beauty that comes through that. And it's just so easy to miss that in daily life. It's there and it's available to us. But it's easy to miss and to think that it needs to be flashier and bigger. And we need more attention for whatever we're doing. And she's just an amazing example of that, as so many older women are, of just kind of quietly doing beautiful, amazing things. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that it's interesting to think about. I don't know if you have these moments, Elle. I'm sure you do. There's no way that I'm the only person that thinks this way, but I think sometimes like I'll look at my little girl and I'll think, someday I'm going to think about you at this age or see a picture of you, and it is going to feel like my heart is being ripped out. And I had that thought the other day. She was like pitching a fit about something. And for whatever reason, I just like thought to myself, someday, like, I'm going to wish that I could go back to this moment when you're pitching a fit. And I think it's really hard for us sometimes when those days feel long and monotonous and lonely to realize how special they are and the beauty in that ordinary that you said that Grandma Moses captured in her art. But it reminds me of the quote from the play Our Town, where Emily like gets the chance to go back and she chooses this ordinary day. And she says, do any human beings ever realize life while they live it every minute? And I think that if we were able to see how special those ordinary days are and how bad we could know, if we could know how badly we will someday long for them, then we'd live them differently. But it's hard to do in the moment.
Oh, it's really beautiful. I mean, yeah, I think that's the trick of it, right? is finding presence in those little moments every day. I think it's the culmination of those moments that makes for a happy life.
Yeah. Well, Elle, this has been so fun. It's been so fun to talk to you. And I am appreciative to you for bringing my attention to some really beautiful thoughts about motherhood and for sharing your thoughts as well. My last question for you is, what does it mean to you to be all in the gospel of Jesus Christ?
Just the other day, I was at my 11-year-old's little co-op in town, and their end of year play. They had an end of year play it's a Christian group that comes together, and this Christian lady in the group, drama teacher, had written these little scenes from the New Testament, and one of them was, I think it was probably from Matthew 10:37, where Christ talks about, if you love your father or mother more of me, you're not worthy of me, or your son or daughter, and just basically take up your cross and follow me, and the narrator in this scene said, if I'm not number one in your life, then I'm nothing to you. And that just has stayed with me for the past few days since I heard it, of is he really number one? If he's not number one, then everything is out of order. And I think that is what it means to be all in on the gospel of Jesus Christ. To me is keeping him number one and really reevaluating that all the time of, is he really, are things out of whack? Because inevitably those priorities are going to get out of order. But when I can say that he's number one, then I can say that I'm all in, I guess.
I love that. So good. Well, thank you so much, Elle. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
We are so grateful to Elle Rowley for joining us on today's episode, and we're grateful to you for listening. As always, big thanks to Derek Campbell of Mix at Six Studios for his help with this episode. We will look forward to being with you again next week.